This article that I'm going to read for you right now is one that I've entitled The Scientific Common Sense of the Saltine Cracker Reality. And that can be found on the homepage of the MoorishDirectory.com. And it reads as follows. Ask yourself this very simple yet extremely logical common sense question. If you take a saltine cracker and you break it in half, does all of the salt on the cracker somehow miraculously jump over to one side or the other side of the cracker? Or is there in fact a reasonably far better and much more realistic practical probability that all of the salt will remain pretty much in place, equally distributed on each of the broken halves, with the only real difference being that the cracker has now been broken into two separate halves, with the salt still remaining in place unchanged and equally distributed. So, now, in a similar manner, ask yourself the same sort of common sense question regarding the separation of our Earth's once singular landmass, Pangaea. Using the exact same God-given common sense as well as scientific logic, as in the afore example of the saltine cracker, would it be in any manner whatsoever, even slightly reasonable, to conceive or accept the totally illogical idea that we, the Aboriginal Indigenous of this once singular landmass, did somehow all of a sudden decide to migrate exclusively to the so-called African side of the dividing landmass? Or would it in fact be far more logically reasonable to accept the fact that we, as a people, the indigenous inhabitants who, by and under international law, have always been correctly recognized as Asiatic Moors, not other ignorant and disparaging misnomers such as nigger, coloreds, Negro, or just as offensive black, and or of course the most recent incorporated brand coined by Jesse Jackson, African American. No. We, in fact, were already here.
a singular, non-material existence, a pure and completely stable, unified, undifferentiated existence, possessing the ultimate of possibilities. And among these possibilities was time itself. The beginning was the simplest of understandings. The primordial consciousness, the knowledge, I am. And with the occurrence of that first event, time began. And that first event was immediately followed by another, the occurrence of the first desire. I will. Instantaneously, by way of the will, came an unfathomably complex, non-physical, multi-dimensional expanse in which all non-material, non-objective principalities, the forces governing order, cause, and effect, would come forth, exist, and reside. And by way of these balanced forces, the enabling extensions of the singular, unified, undifferentiated existence, the will allowed for the presence of a space beyond probability in which material things of the most primordial, physical, objective nature could and would come into being and exist. The Alpha Colagrium, within the singular stream of consciousness. With unity persisting, here, all events in the physical and objective realm of the omni-singular existence would occur. The perception of the here and now, the realm of present, is where the individual nature, for all intent and purpose, resides. For many, if not most, this, the universal aspect of us, our unified oneness, that which all things and beings are intrinsically linked, operates beyond the perceptions of our physical conscious precepts. And it is this one fact which stands as our only true divine point, our inability to recognize our oneness, and that oneness is pure, unadulterated, unconditional love, that which bestows in the objective as well as subjective realms of perception all law.
It got dark outside, so I had to cut some light on. All right, try to start this again. This is from the Office of the Mayor, City of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel Mayor, proclamation. The former White House Chief of Staff wrote the following. Whereas the Moorish Americans are the descendants of the ancient Moabites, Hammonites, and Canaanites, who were permitted by the old pharaohs of Kemet to traverse from East Africa and later formed themselves vast kingdoms extending from northwest and southwest shores of Africa, the Atlantic islands onto the present-day continental Americas. And whereas the indigenous Moorish people of the Americas are now united again to link themselves with the family of nations. And whereas the Moorish Americans, being aboriginal to these territories of North, Central, and South America, have formed a sovereign theocratic government guided by the command principles of love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice, through virtue of the universal rights of self-determination, as well as the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, guaranteed in the Charter. Now, when he's saying the Charter, he's talking about the Charter that you can find on the State Department website, the United Nations Charter for the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, signed in to effect underneath the Obama administration. Continuing. Whereas on January 8, 1886, Noble Drew Ali was born in the state of North Carolina, destined to become the first patriot of his mentally enslaved Moorish American people. In 1912, he was later anointed as El Hajj Sharif Abdul Ali by the heads of Egypt and Holy City of Mecca to return to the United States as the last prophet and founding father of the newly risen nation of Moorish Americans. And again, that was a proclamation that was supposed to have been read by all of the mayors in all of the cities of all of the states, but of course wasn't. It was read by a few, and it was supposed to have been also read in such places as the churches and other social gathering places, which of course it wasn't done either. In any event, that was important for those to hear it that had not heard that. All right, so when you're on the internet and you navigate to the moorishdirectory.com, what you'll do is you will first scroll down and click on the seal. This is going to help, again, to acclimate your mind to common sense, practical thinking, critical logic. So if you click that, you'll be provided what's called the Great American Riddle, a note worth pondering. And it reads as follows. Scientific fact. Biologically, it's impossible for a human to go without water for more than 6 days without experiencing electrolyte dysfunction, biodehydration, and the shutdown of major life-sustaining organs due to an absence of proper cellular hydration. The Great American Riddle. How do 400 to 600 slaves, suffering in the sweltering heat of a cargo hull, vomiting and expelling copious body fluids, go 5 months without drinkable water? While you think about a logical answer, you may wish to also note that water having a far greater weight per cubic inch than that of the human body is the very reason we float. As the science of physics would demonstrate, having an adequate amount of drinking water aboard a clipper ship, even to sustain the lives of 400 to 600 enslaved humans, is in all reality scientifically impossible. The weight of the water alone would, without question, cause the boat to sink at the dock. That's physics. Further still, while pondering a reasonable answer to the riddle, picture the proposed conditions, like that of a hot box, an improperly vented cargo hold, with 400 to 600 bodies stacked 4 to 5 high, suffering from stagnant fumes of diarrhea, profuse sweat, baking rotten flesh, and festering wounds, dead bodies, mildew, and more, may also help one to gain a greater appreciation of how unlikely the transplanting scenario ever actually took place, as we have been led so easily without question to believe. If you are still clinging to the belief that the so-called or so branded African American Negro was in fact transplanted to this continent under the conditions as described above, you may also wish to view and benefit from the scientific and historical anthropological evidence presented at the MoorishDirectory.com. So just to let you know that there are mechanisms that are going to allow for you to be interactive with the site as you are studying. All right. It was not to say that the Middle Passage did not occur. Get that clear. By no means is the great American Riddle trying to say that the Middle Passage did not occur. It did. However, it did not occur exclusively, nor on the scale in which they stated. Sure, there may have still been millions who died in the process, and quite a large number who, in fact, were brought here. But that would constitute perhaps, I don't know, I'm taking a guess, 10%, maybe 5%, wherein the rest of the majority of us who are here are connected to this land. This is our home by blood. There's a sanguine connection, a connection to the land by blood. All right? And that's important to know, because this is the property in which you would be considered a national upon. You would be rightfully, as is recognized by law, as being the actual sovereign. And your rights as such remain. As a matter of fact, there is a document that you can also find on this site, which is the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, who you should certainly take time to read, unfold, so that you may understand the guarantees that have been laid out in that charter that's ratified, signed by the United Nations as one of the senior signatories. This is not an old nor archaic document. This was signed within this particular administration's time. That was signed underneath the Obama administration, for those that might be seeing this later, so that you'll know what administration I'm speaking of. So this is not ancient. This is not going back to such as the agreements that were signed or the letters that were sent from George Washington to the Sultan of our empire in New York, because in fact our empire was in New York. That's why it's the Empire State, where there's the Empire State Building. And we were the originators, of course, of global trade. And that's why the World Trade Centers are there, which they took down. But also, we're not trying to suggest, that's just language, that those particular documents or the letter from George Washington to the Sultan at the Empire in New York are ancient. It's just a phrase. That would still be considered relatively as modern as well. All right, so when we're talking about ancient, of course, we'd be talking about going back into antiquity. So I just want to clear that, so that no one jumps out and says, well, that's not. Of course, we know that's not ancient. So just to clarify that point. All right. And speaking of which, when we're coming down, it'd be important that you pause at some of these first links to avail yourself of further information to provide the newly conscious individuals, as well as those that may not have been familiar with this at all, a better understanding of who we are. So when you're coming on the site, you don't have to go down too far before you see this particular link here that says who we are. You should click upon that, interactive again, and watch this particular video, which is going to give you a great, concise, Reader's Digest encapsulated version of who we are, presented in a far better manner in which I could do in such a short period of time. I would recommend that you take time to do that. Matter of fact, even before proceeding any further. Now, this particular site is, of course, an aspect of the Moorish Nation Republic, Moorish Divine and National Movement of the world. Okay? And here you will also find that we connect ourselves with a great many of other sites on the internet that are also, you will find, of great benefit. I'm just going to pause here for a moment since I'm in the area to show you that there are also materials relative to true Moorish science. Material that you might not find elsewhere, that is going to be dealing with actual metaphysics, which is the foundation of Moorish science. And in my opinion, if you are not attempting to understand true metaphysics, then you are not trying to understand true Moorish science. And here, like everything else that is on the directory, you will find is also interactive and quite in depth. And as you read this particular book called The Key, what you will need to do is actually be interactive with it. If you do not look at the links and participate with the classes or seminars, reviewing them in their entirety as is not just suggested but directed to do, then you will have accumulated gaps in your understanding, and you will not be availed of the information that is going to afford you an opportunity to raise the consciousness level, to increase your frequency in order to effectuate those things here in the objective realm that can only be effected by way of the subjective realm. All of that may have sounded a lot of gobbledygook because you're not understanding what terms mean. So I would suggest that you take an opportunity to at least initially skim through the Key and see what it has to offer. There's going to be a lot of interesting things here. There's a hieroglyphics right here that you can see. We've got a spaceship, we've got a helicopter, we've got land ships, all types of very, very interesting things that you'll find within this PDF. And on the side of the temple here, we're seeing an actual astronaut on the side of a Gothic temple. How did that get there, huh? Kind of interesting. And this is Mayan statue, which of course we can see the likely the likeness here. And there's a great deal of information that you will benefit from perusing this book. Case in point, You'll come to understand things that otherwise, up until this point, you may have considered was more so just superstition, like the number 666, just as an example. 666 is not anything to be afraid of, like the sign of the beast. All right, this is dealing with 6 electrons, 6 protons, 6 neutrons. That's carbon-based atom, which is the basis of man. And if you take a carbon atom and you look at it underneath a electron microscope, then you will find, staring back at you, what we call the Star of David. All right, so there's going to be a great deal in here that will move you in the direction of adeptness, to becoming more adept with the rudiments of Moorish science, which is metaphysics. Case in point, this particular symbol here, the eye, I'm sure that all of you are familiar with, but might not be aware of the fact that these symbols are actual mathematical symbols that represent these percentages of the whole. And the reason for that is relative to our consciousness and plane of consciousness, which you can find out more by reading the key. But as I said, you will not benefit from it if you do not do as suggested, and that is to not just read through it like you would in your average book, because you will have accumulated gaps in your information if you do not partake of the links that you're going to find throughout this, because it builds upon itself. In case in point, if you are, let's say, reading something on page 7 or 8, and it has a hyperlink in it for a seminar that's a couple hours long, which doesn't mean you have to look at it all at one point in time. You can look at part of it, come back and look at the rest of it before you proceed in the key. And that will allow for you to understand things, let's say, when you get to page 70. Because if you don't pause and partake of the information that's connected to these hyperlinks, then you'll get to, let's say, page 62, and you'll be reading something there, and you won't understand it because of the accumulated gaps in your information. And then you'll find that you're actually going to have to go back and start again, which I've had people do, and then they've called me back and they've said, wow, I had no idea that I was missing so much by not pausing to do it correctly as instructed. All right, so going into the site further, of course, as I said, there's a great deal to partake relative to the site itself on just the cover page, but you can also go into the site wherein you are going to have entrance into all of these other pages that when you get there you can take a look at. But I wanted to point out also that, again, all of the resources that are here, let's just show you one resource. On the legal page, if you click that, you can read through it and bring you down to the Moorish rights card. You can print this out, cut it out, fold it. There's the front and the back, laminate it, and keep this with you. All right? This will provide you with a card that will have the power to diffuse a lot of situations that otherwise could very quickly get out of hand. Now, people that may not be familiar with coming in contact with the civilian armed forces don't understand that there can be a great deal of anxiety connected to that, needless to say. But if you take this card, I just clicked on it, and print it out and keep this with you, then you're going to find that it allows for you to hand this card to another person and you do not even have to speak. It says that I hereby evoke and refuse to waive all of the following rights and privileges guaranteed to me by the United States Republic Constitution. And further, I invoke and refuse to waive my Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. Do not ask me any questions. I invoke and refuse to waive my Sixth Amendment rights to legal counsel of my choice. Do not ask me any questions without the legal counsel of my choice present. And you can read the rest of the card. But that gives you an example of what I'm speaking of relative to the fact that it can diffuse a lot of situations. Simply handing this to someone who may be harassing you or stopping you without good cause or reason will avail them with the information that they should have learned in the academy. And this will help to remind them that they do not have a right to simply stop you for looking like you do or being who you are, if in fact there is no valid reason for doing so. So that can be found on the legal page. And you'll find all other types of jewels all throughout here. Case in point, going back here real quickly to the home page, just to show that even on the home page there are further things which are very valuable and free. Case in point, the Moorish app, which you'll find on the front page. And here there is a device which you can download, again, for free. It has over 20 resources within the app for Android and the iPhone. Now, when you're downloading this, if you see a message or something that says it's not sure whether or not this app is, safe or whatever, that's kind of a boilerplate. It's a statement that Google Play or the iStore will have out there because they don't want to be taking on the responsibility of apps that are not necessarily connected with them, even though it's being downloaded and has been reviewed by them. They're trying to disconnect themselves from any liabilities, and I can rest assure you that there is nothing nefarious regarding either of the apps for the Android or the iPhone. There are not even commercials connected to this. We're not trying to sell you anything. We're just trying to provide you with those resources that are going to be of benefit to Moors. This is created by active Moors for active Moors. And you'll find that when you're standing in line at the store or sitting on the bus or subway, train, or what have you, park bench, that you can then be studying wherever you are or connecting with other Moors wherever you are and learning and associating and becoming more conscious of whom you are by having this device, which again is completely free, and it doesn't have any type of bugs or cookies or the rest of it or trackers or any of that type of foolishness. This is completely independent of any other type of financial resources. This is fully financed by the MoorisDirectory.com for your benefit. And everything else that you'll find here at the Moorish Directory is free for your partaking. All right, so when you have opportunity, do take time to visit us and kind of scout around and see what benefit you'll have from coming to the site. You'll also find a link page on here where In fact, if you go there, you're going to have opportunity to visit other Moorish sites, such as you will not find in the collection elsewhere, that will avail you with just, again, a plethora of information. Case in point, one site here that I particularly found great value in, that's the Moorish Nation Public Records. And here you will find such a wealth, a total cornucopia of documents to review, perusal, downloads in the form of PDFs regarding all nature of things that are of importance and value to your community. And what I have done is I've gone through and I have actually downloaded each and every document that I found on this site and placed them into the long legal binders, 3-reading binders, so that I could, in fact, and have read through each and every page and become familiar, not just with the terminology, but the concepts and the understanding of what these writs are about, the purpose and the value of them, and the purpose and the value of the language comprising them, and what they constitute. And that's something that I would recommend for everyone, because then you can take the material and you can, in fact, highlight it, what you find there to be of value and importance. And I use a couple different highlighters, because I'll read a document and then I'll come back later and I'll find even more material that I'll find of value, and I'll want to mark that with a different color marker. And as my knowledge and astuteness of information grows, then of course a greater degree of understanding is going to unfold itself for you. So of course, when you go back and you read documents that you've read before, you're going to find that you're going to get more out of it. So that's all to say that if you've read a document, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't go back and read it again. And also what I do, because I don't have a photographic memory, so I will make notes actually on my document that may direct me back to another document that I found here or elsewhere, in order for me to be able to cross-index my understanding with material that I have garnered elsewhere. And one of those elsewheres that I was speaking of might be, let's go ahead and close out of here, something that I found at one of the other sites. An example can be found by way of the Proclaiming Your Nationality page, for an example. All right. Now, here, and again, just to reiterate, proclaiming is the act of making the statement, actually proclaiming it. It's self-explanatory. If you say something, then you are proclaiming it. So if you proclaim that you are an Moorish American, Aboriginal, and Indigenous, flesh and blood human, attached to this land by blood heritage, then you are making the statement and identifying yourself with your culture and connecting yourself to your hereditament, your rights, and identifying your allegiances. And just while we're on the subject, no one can come back and trick you out of who you have given your allegiance to, all right? Your allegiance cannot be taken away from you. You have to voluntarily resign oneself of your allegiance to something or make a new allegiance to something else before that changes. And proclamation is not the document. The document is the record. It's an administrative process by which you would record having proclaimed, and those documents would be recorded. So the document is a matter of recordation. All right? The act of proclaiming is in fact stating who you are. Proclaiming who you are and also identifying under which authority you have placed your allegiance. Now that's going to be relative to jurisdictions. And of course you'll be able to find out all of that information by visiting any of these sites that I'm showing you today. All right, now, relative as an example, this particular page that we're on now, it's the Proclaim Your Nationality page. It's going to give you a lot of information here, but I wanted to point out for you that just like on the links page, you'll find throughout the site various links that will take you to other sites. One particular very important site is RV Bay Publications, and a particular page there of particular interest regarding proclaiming one's nationality would be the Writs of Freedom page, which you can connect by coming here. All right, so let's go ahead in there and take a look at this particular treasure. I would recommend for anyone who has not visited RV Bay to take out a pen and paper and prepare yourself for a treat. Start at the home page and begin with how to use this site so that you can, in fact, get the greatest benefit out of your utilization of the information that is contained herein. All right? There are also going to be books and publications in which you could actually obtain hard copies of by way of RV Bay. Sorry, I had to close the door. It started to rain. That was the noise that you were hearing in the background. All right. So down the left side here is going to be the index. And as you can see, there's a great deal of information, and every page is packed. Now, on the particular page, Writs of Freedom is going to avail you with a great deal of information, extremely valuable information that you should study. Not simply read, but study, and there's a big difference. All right? Study the information, take notes, and if you have questions about it, actually you can contact the proprietor of this particular site, Roz Mariah Bay, at on her Blog Talk radio program on Tuesdays evenings at 9:30, I believe that it is. The facts regarding that can be checked here on rvbaypublications.com. And you should, when you call, starts at 9:30, you should probably try to call in a little bit earlier so that you can get in on the queue if you have questions, or if you're just wanting to listen, go ahead and just call in and enjoy yourself. But that's going to be found by Googling the Moorish History School, Eyes Wide Open. And you can also, of course, find the link by way of RV Bay Publications, as well as the link is also on themoorishdirectory.com. And I would recommend that even if you do not have questions which arise from the page, that you still take the time to listen in on their program, because I have never tuned in and not been amazed at the wealth of information and the value that I've walked away with, having had the opportunity to listen in and from time to time even participate by calling in and communicating with the brothers and sisters there. So whenever you do have opportunity to speak with adepts and those that have the information that you're looking for, always take advantage of that opportunity. But don't just call and ask questions without studying first. You should call and ask questions legitimately regarding something that you have studied and then have a question about. Don't just call because you're too lazy to read. All right? That's not what this is about. Also, since we're in the intellectual neighborhood of that, all right, there are those that do not like to read. Unfortunately, it's important. Now, I do understand that there are going to be those who may have difficulty with reading. That's nothing necessarily to be ashamed of. The educational system in this country is horrible. And it's even worse for those whom they have marginalized and set up barriers intentionally to slow down our educational process. So that is somewhat of the nature of the beast. So if you do have difficulties in reading, that's understandable. However, if you don't, then don't be lazy. Read the material, study the material, take your notes, and then if you have questions, by all means, call in, email, what have you. Get in contact at that point when you have a legitimate question regarding something that you have studied, and perhaps there might be a little bit deeper understanding that you may want to garner from the material, that instinctively you know that there's a bit more that you can understand that you're not getting out of the explanation. All right? Getting back to this page, you'll find that the links here are invaluable. And you're going to find boilerplates here for writs as well as documents for proclaiming your nationality, obtaining ID, for correcting your name. And these forms are uniform, which is very important. They have uniformity, all right, as an aspect of your process. But again, proclaiming is the act of stating, making the statement, I proclaim I'm Moorish American, Aboriginal, and Indigenous to this land, stating your understanding of your heritage, your heritage, your forebearers, understanding your status, your nationality, and under which particular jurisdiction you fall. So do take time when you have opportunity to visit RV Bay Publications. You won't be sorry. All right, so we're back on the cam. Now, this is the first YouTube presentation that I've done. I plan on doing more in the future. So I'm not what they would call a YouTube expert by any means, nor am I a public speaker. But there are particular things that I felt were important to communicate in my attempts to aid others in understanding some things that I consider as being basic. So I do plan on extending this series into the future. So this will be followed by another. So I'm not going to try to roll everything into this first introductory. But one thing that I would like to address before I leave, there will be a point where I'm going to go into this with a little bit more in depth. The Constitution. All right? And I know that there are a lot of Moors out there that study it and give classes on it, and that is fantastic. It's what we should continue to do. It's not just something to read. Again, this is something to study. However, there are some misconceptions with regards to the Constitution. I'm just looking around for my glasses. I'm going to give you the example by reading into Article 1. In other words, we don't have to go too deep into the Constitution to find that there are things in here that, in my opinion, have been overlooked by many who have talked in depth about the Constitution. Also recognize that the Constitution is a document which was relative to, as many of you are may be aware, a republic. The current regime has told you they are a democracy. Completely different beast. All right? So if you know that, like you learned in school, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberties and justice for all. It's what it purports. However, the current governance, I didn't say government, I said governance, have explained to you time and time again that it is a democracy. That's a different form of government. And you would learn that in civics if they still had civics class. But what they did is they got rid of civics and replaced it with a thing called social studies. All right, now social studies is teaching you about the structure of government and the power of government over the people. Wherein civics taught of the power of the people over the government. So they phased out civics and replaced it with social studies so that we would not understand things that were said, like in the Constitution, or our position as the people, and would not have an understanding over time, generationally, that we are empowered with certain rights that are unalienable, unalienable. Human rights, which vary from civil rights, which are bestowed upon you and are arbitrary and can be taken away, wherein your human rights can't be taken away. But as you probably heard, if you don't know your rights, then you can't stand up for your rights. So you have human rights and then you have civil rights. Civil rights are arbitrary. They're bestowed. And as they are bestowed, they can also be taken away. Right? Alienable rights, God-given rights, cannot be taken away. Now, relative, and tie back bridge to the republic and the democracy. those that signed this particular document were a different group than those that you're dealing with today. That's a complexity that we'll get into at another time. Relative to the Constitution, just at this point, what I'll do is I'm just going to get into the very beginning of Article 1. All right? Section 2. All right, in the second paragraph of Section 2. Okay? Let's see here. Article 1. My screen is backwards, so I can't really see what's going on here. Okay? Section 2. All right? It says, no person shall be a representative who shall not have attained to the age of 25 years and been 7 years a citizen of the United States, and who shall not, when elected, be an inhabitant of that state in which he shall be chosen. All right. So what is that saying? Well, it's pretty self-explanatory. It says, and who shall not, when elected, that they shall not, when elected, be an inhabitant. In other words, living in the state in which he shall be chosen or elected. So that would mean pretty much that whomever is living in a state in which it was elected, that would seem to me to be a disqualifier. That if you're living in a state, according to the Constitution, if you are an inhabitant of the state in which you were elected or chosen, it's saying here, that's a disqualifier. All right, so now you're scratching your head and you're saying, I never heard of that before. That's new. Well, no, it's not new. It's just one of those things that people don't focus in on. Perhaps because it's a little confusing. But I'll explain why that is. All right? If you have a system wherein those who are elected are representatives of a particular populace, if they are not living in that state, then they have no personal gain by their representation. They're going to give fair representation because it's not going to be their personal gain. And then their colleagues will have a responsibility of ensuring that in the state in which they are inhabited are best representative of the people. Now, what this does is it brings us back to what? The golden rule, right? As you would have them do on here. So really what that means is it's stating here that there should be no self-interest. That you should be representing the people honestly and without personal gain. And then your colleague in the House or the Senate, because it reads the same for both, will be doing their best to ensure that you are best represented. That's the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's what Article 1, Section 2 is talking about. But currently, as it's written here, everyone's disqualified because they live or inhabit the state in which they have been chosen. A lot of interesting things. Well, to wrap it up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you something that is very interesting, somewhat current events. There was a new tunnel that was opened up in Switzerland. This is the longest, deepest tunnel in the history of mankind, supposedly. And there is a ceremony that was held, and from what they say, it was kind of like, almost like representative of the United Nations, dignitaries from all over the world attended this ceremony of the opening of this tunnel in Switzerland. And I'm going to show you a piece of a clip from this particular ceremony. And just to set up what may be in our next conversation. When you hear things about that we are, this is almost biblical, dealing with municipalities on high. They're talking about metaphysically. They're talking about things that are not of the objective plane. They're talking about things that are more so on the spiritual plane, which is important because you understand as a Moor, we have been given a task, a noble task, charged with being active in the process of uplifting fallen humanity underneath the guide principles of love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice. So we have to understand that as we raise our consciousness, we then have the ability to, through that heightened frequency, begin to deal with metaphysically those things that will animate our abilities to effectuate that which will uplift fallen humanity. But at the same time, and with the same token, there are others who are also dealing with things on a metaphysical basis, and they have been doing so for quite some time, for eons. Now, when we're looking at things such as the World Trade Center being taken down and creating this atmosphere of fear, this atmosphere, that's relative to the opposite of love. The opposite of love is not hate, all right? Love is something that can be placed within the context of a mother standing in front of a bullet for their child. A totally non-selfish act, doing away with lower self, only thinking about the safety of their child. Love is fearless. Love is fearless. So that would mean that the opposite of love would be fear or terror. All right? Love is a very fast vibration, like slicing through metal like butter, like a hot knife through butter. Okay? Whereas the LFO, or low oscillating frequency of terror, as was created with the taking down of the World Trade Centers, which was an act of terrorism, horrible act, that was a metaphysical ritual. Some call it opening up a vortex, dealing with ritualistically the toppling of the Tower of Boaz. We can get into that type of thing a little bit later. But basically what it was doing, it was setting the hive mind of man to focus on the empire, New York. And all of it was being focused with fear. And what that does is it slows down our progress of positioning ourselves to deal metaphysically with the things that are coming. So I'm going to show you the ritual that they had at the opening of this recent ceremony, inaugurating this tunnel, this vortex. You'll see the symbolisms of the womb, the scarabs, Baphomet, and I could go on and on. I'll just let you see for yourself.
The world's longest tunnel, but the 34-mile-long railroad came at a heavy cost. 8 men lost their lives during the construction.
I just needed to interject right here, because the number 8 is significant. All right? 8 is dealing with the metaphysics of consciousness. 8 represents the cube. It's the representation of the space, as it were. Okay, the dimensions in which our consciousness exists within this animated realm, this illusion. Matter of fact, Einstein, this is a very famous quote by Einstein, when he was asked about this physical world, this objective reality. And they asked him, well, after all of your years as one of the world's foremost scientists, what do you think this physical reality is all about? And Einstein said, and it's a very famous quote, you can Google it, look it up for yourself. He said, it's the same thing that all the gurus, the wise men, the sages, the masterminds of all ages have said. It's an illusion, but a persistent one. Because he recognized at the end of studying for over 50 years the physical world, that's what physicists do, they study the physical existence of this dimension. Basically, he came to understand that all is mind, that the mind creates the brain, not the brain creates the mind. But we'll get into that in the next series. The reason that I interject myself here is just to explain that there are deeper meanings to things. When you hear something on the news, don't just take it on self-value. There's usually 3 meanings: the mundane, the esoteric, and then the exoteric. And in this particular situation, they're explaining that 8 consciousnesses were snuffed out during the creation of this tunnel. But the tunnel is more of a cover story in actuality. But that number 8 is also relative, because numbers themselves are far more meaningful, which we'll talk about at another point, than what we give them credit for. All right? Numbers, when you hear someone speak of the, what is the numerical value of this or the numerical value of that? What they're really saying is, what is the new miracle value? What is the value in this new miracle? What is the miracle relevance of this number? So with that, anyway, we'll go back and we'll get into that aspect of it later. But let's return to this bizarre ritual.
The world's longest tunnel, but the 34-mile-long railroad came at a heavy cost. 8 men lost their lives during the construction.
They are celebrating in Switzerland, where the world's longest train tunnel just opened. It took 17 years to build, and thanks to the precision of the Swiss, the massive project came in on time and on budget.
Well, if you just joined us, you're watching the opening ceremony of the world's longest and deepest rail tunnel under the Swiss Alps. It's officially been opened. This spectacle very much showing how...
And an impressive ceremony with a guest list that read like a meeting of the United Nations.
When you celebrate science, perhaps it's best to not get carried away. The inauguration ceremony included some, how should we put it, original choreography.
It was quite bizarre.
Aidalami, do you associate this kind of dancing with the inauguration of a tunnel?
I don't understand
It's leaving
art
you
enough.
speechless.
It leaves me speechless.
I get claustrophobic just thinking about that tunnel.
All right. We're going to
Me
leave.
too.
Where was that? That was in the tunnel?
I guess it was at
Seems-
one of the two entrances. Anyway, there you have it.
She joins us now watching the ceremony. I was just saying there, Imogen, this very enjoyable spectacle with dancers, and I presume some people that have taken part in the project as well, shows just how immensely proud the Swiss are of this tunnel for so many reasons.
That's sick. We'll talk about it next time. And until then, I wish you peace and that you continue to prosper.